So, welcome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We are going to do our Ruckus 101 presentation. This is just a quick overview of basically sales information, installation information, and service information for the Ruckus product line of both indoor, outdoor access points and switches, and the benefits of buying them with Blackwire. So, without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So again, kind of our agenda, we're going to go over some recommended network examples. We're going to talk about some of the product line and talk about some of their specifications and how they compare to some of the other products in the marketplace today. We'll go over some of the myths that you may have heard about either Ruckus or buying from Blackwire. We'll also take a look at the configuration and setup deep dive, where we're going to go over our 101 guide that's on our website. And then we'll also talk about remote service and support options that we have. So getting started at some of our recommended network topologies. For a router, we're going to be recommending our Netgear PR460X router. This is a 10 gig WAN to LAN router that has both SFP and copper connections on it. And what this means is it's a really great SKU for those of you who want something that'll support the new fiber and high-speed internet options that are available to folks' houses, right? So if you've got 1 gig, if you've got 2.5, you've got 5 gig, you've got 10 gig options, this will be able to pass those high speeds through to both your wired and your wireless network. So this is a great piece to pair up with the Ruckus Wi-Fi system and a Ruckus ICX core switch. So our recommended topology is going to be this main ICX core switch with all your devices plugged into it. If you need more than the, say, 24 or 48 ports on that, and we're going to cascade a switch or stack a switch off of it, we're going to recommend dedicated secondary switches for things like our MXNet or just add power video over IP systems that are both supported on the Ruckus ICX switches. And then if you have secondary switches, we're going to recommend connecting those via fiber and using their 10 gig SFP, so you can make sure that you're getting a good link up between the two, right? On some of the newer switches, we're getting even beyond that to 25 gig and 40 gig SFP connections. So once we start talking about some of the multi-gig switches for PoE and connectivity in the future, support access points like not just the ART 650, 750, and 850, that would be capable of doing a multi-gig, like 2.5 gig or better. When we start talking about switch infrastructure for going forward for like a Wi-Fi 7 capability, the Wi-Fi 7 access points are also going to support multi-gig as well. That R770 that'll be coming out later this year will support a 10 gig network connection. So any of these options, like I said, we'll make sure that we've got of the proper core switch in place, and then if necessary, any of these secondary switches, either for a video distribution system or for if you've got a switch out in a second building or in another IT closet or rack room, we're going to get those connected up by fiber. Moving on here, so we'll start talking about some of the product lineup. So we've got the 8200 line here. This is the newer line of switches that Ruckus has come out with. We've got a 24 port 1 gig switch at a $2,900 MSRP. This is a really great, very quiet switch, 40 dB at minimum fan speed, really impressive 248 gig switch capacity, and 4 of those 25 gig stackable SFP 28 ports. So it is a 1 gig switch, but you have the ability to get a lot of bandwidth between it and your core switch or other switches if need be. If you need more ports than that, you could step it up to the 48 port 1 gig switch. This is not PoE, this is just standard at this point, right? Same really great switch capacity, still very quiet, still has the 425 gig stackables. And then we've also got this one, which is pretty neat. So this is a 24FX 10 gig SFP, right? There's no PoE, there's no standard RJ45 copper connections on this. This is all fiber 10 gig SFP ports. So this would be a really great core switch if you have the need to have a bunch of other switches throughout the project, because you have the ability to get 16 10 gig SFP plus and 8 25 gig SFP 28 ports to link those up. 720 gig switch capacity, still very quiet switch, so you don't have to worry about, this thing sounding like a jumbo jet taking off on the runway like some of these other switches in the marketplace, right? This is a really awesome switch to have in your arsenal. All of these switches, I do want to point out, have a limited lifetime warranty. So these are built to last. Let's take a look at some of the PoE switches. We've got still some of the ICX 7150 12-port PoEs. This is a workhorse, small switch for like at a desktop location. $1,760 MSRP, 68 gig switch capacity. This guy is fanless, and it has two 10 gig SFP ports, so you can link that up with fiber if you like. This is a really, really awesome switch. Very compact size. It does have the ability to be rack mounted with an optional rack mount kit. But this is a really great PoE switch to have. 124 watt budget. Stepping that up, you've got more ports in the 24 port 7150, 132 gig switch capacity. This too is fanless up to 150 watts PoE, and you'll see that on a number of these SKUs, which is really something that, pardon the pun, is unheard of in our industry because of how quiet they are. We've also got 48 port options for a standard PoE 370 watt budgets. But let's say you need a little bit more. You're doing a lot of cameras, you're doing a lot of access points, touch panels, different things that require PoE. And here in the bottom left, we've got the 7150 48 port. This has 180 gig switch capacity on the backplane. It's got four 10 gig SFP ports. And it's got a big 740 watt budget for those needs. And we've also got 200 here in the bottom, this 8200 24 port, 370 watts PoE, four 25 gig SFP ports. So that's really the big differentiator between the 7150s and the 8200s, right? The SFP connectivity options when you're getting into SFP 28 for the 25 gig, and the backplane is going to be bigger, more capability, right? Because they also have to support on some of the SKUs, which we'll see here in a little bit, multi-gig PoE and multi-gig standard non-PoE connectivity options. And then lastly, we've got the big beast over here, the 8200 48 port PF. This is a 740 watt power supply, 48 port switch, 296 gig switch capacity, and four 25 gig SFP 28 ports. This is a big one. Moving on, if you need more PoE capability for PoE++, so this would be for instances where you need to power up like a Ruckus R850 access points or a T750 outdoor, right? Maybe there's some devices that you're doing that needs that 60 watt PoE++ capability. These are going to be the switches that you'll look at, right? We've got ICX 7150 48 ZP. This is a multi-gig PoE++, right? You've got 32 1 gig PoE ports, 16 2.5 gig PoE++. You have the option of getting this switch ordered in either a 740 watt or a 1,480 watt PoE budget. Just depends on the number of power supplies that you get with it. Really great switch. Coming up to the 8200. If you need a little bit more connectivity on your SFPs, this will do 24 2.5 gig PoE++, four 25 gig SFP 28s, and a 740 watt PoE budget. That's a killer switch. Moving up, if you need more ports, we've got the 8248 ZP2-E. This is a multi-gig PoE++ on 16 of the ports. 32 of them are 1 gig PoE. And then we've got four SFP 28, 25 gig uplink ports and a 740 watt PoE budget. And then lastly, we've got the 7150 48 ZP. Same capabilities. You get the option to power it either with a 740 watt or a 1,480 watt PoE budget. So Ruckus, as you can see, can really run the gamut, right? They've got small silent switches that can do PoE for the desktop. They've got big switches that can do multi-gigabit PoE++ and get you taken care of with your high connectivity needs for 25 gig SFP 28s. Moving on for some of the access points, you may be a little bit confused if it's your first time looking at the product lineup, right? You may hear of R series, T series, H series. What does it all mean? Well, once you kind of figure out the prefix scheme, it makes it fairly easy, right? The R series is all going to be your indoor ceiling mount access points. The T series will all be your outdoor access points, and your H series are going to be the wall mounted access points that are designed to be in a room, right? We'll go over some of those here in a little bit, but they're all really flexible options as far as choosing which model you need for your application. Let's take a look at the R series. This is a kind of a modified Ruckus product guide. This PDF is available on their website for free to download. You don't have to have a login or anything. I modified it a little bit just because the R350 is actually on the second page, but I wanted to show the 350 here in comparison to the 550, the 650, 750, and 850, right? Those are the models that have the stars that I added here. And the reason that we're looking at those and not necessarily the R560 and the R760, those are the 6E access points. And right now, the 6E access points are not currently supported in Unleashed. They are supported in Smart Zone and Ruckus Cloud. So if that's a platform that you have, these access points are definitely an option. However, our focus right now is going to be on the Wi-Fi 6 access points that are available in Unleashed, because that's the majority, like 99.9% of all of our installs are on the Unleashed platform, which is really great. So if we look at the R350, that's an entry-level 2x2x2 radio. It's got 64 antenna patterns. It's got Beam Flex Plus, and it's a 1 gig Ethernet, just standard PoE, nothing really crazy about it. This is a really good access point, and one of the things about it is you can actually mix and match the models of the access points in the same project. So let's say you've got high traffic area like master bedroom, living room, guest bedroom, or one of the kids' bedrooms, playroom, something like that. You can use a higher end access point for more client devices there, and use the R350 in other areas where maybe there's not as much client traffic or demand, but still get really great Wi-Fi, right? So the R350, don't be scared to include it, as the main access point in your jobs. If it's a smaller job, you're doing maybe like a 1,200 square foot, 2,400 square foot house. These are definitely okay for those, low demand areas. And you can also use these as supplemental access points in larger projects where you need to make sure that, like, say, a basement area that's maybe not used all that much, but they want to have connectivity when they go down there, or maybe in the garage. This would be a great access point out there too, in supplement to some of the other APs, because if you're thinking about it now, garage door openers and Rachio sprinkler controllers and trucks and cars now all connect to the internet. So it's important to have that connectivity out there, even if it's not high demand, like we're trying to do a Zoom call or something like that. The R350 is great for those. Moving up into kind of the middle of the line, we've got the R550, which is pretty much the same. You'll notice that the concurrent users does double on that. Speeds are the same, antenna patterns are the same, the radio chain's the same. The sensitivity on the receive, though, is a little bit better, right? But other than that, they're pretty functionally similar. So R550, R350 are very close. The R350 does save you a little bit of money. Then stepping up, really kind of the mid-range go-to access point is going to be the R650, which I think a lot of you guys will be installing in your jobs if you're not already. This has a really good 5 gigahertz 4x4 radio chain. It's still 2x2 on the 2.4 gigahertz, which is fine. Your antenna patterns jump up from 64 to 128 on this model. And if you look at, also does support one 2.5 gig multi-gigabit PoE port on it. So if you want to start planning ahead for making sure that your client devices have a really good pipe from the wireless side to the wired side, and take advantage of some of those multi-gig switches, multi-gig, if you've got a 2.5 gig internet connection coming into the house, this would be where you would want to start to make sure that that gets all the way as close to your client devices as you can. So that's a really great access point, the R650. If you bump up to the R750, the benefits there are going to be that your concurrent users double, your 2.4 gigahertz radio chain turns into a 4x4, right? So you've got faster speeds on the 2.4 overall. Your antenna patterns go up significantly, right? You were jumping from 128 antenna patterns to 4,000 plus. So let's say you've got a project that's very dense as far as there's a lot of neighbors near the house that you're working on, or maybe this is an MDU or something like that. There's going to be a lot of Wi-Fi co-channel interference and things like that. So being able to take advantage of these antenna patterns means that the radio signal is going to be more focused to the client devices that it's able to connect to, and it's got the ability to shape that radio traffic towards those client devices really well. It also has the 2.5 gig Ethernet connection, and that's going to be kind of the big step up once you go from the 650 up to the 750, right? And then finally, the R850, if you've got a client who has some money to burn, or if you're actually doing like a stadium or something like that, this is the AP. That's the big workhorse. You'll see that the 5 gigahertz is a 8x8 radio chain, and your 2.4 is still a 4x4. 4,000 plus antenna patterns, up to 2 dB antenna gain, right? You're going up to a 5 gig on your Ethernet PoE port, which is awesome. Because, I mean, look at the clients. You're talking about 1,024 concurrent users, and we're really being able to run them through the gamut with this access point. It really is a workhorse. And there's really hardly anything else like it on the market. So let's take a look here in a little bit more detail. This is still some of the R350 from that second page, but it also shows the H series. Now, these are those in-room access points that we were talking about. These things are pretty cool. We'll get into detail a little bit later on them with some pictures, because it's hard to see here, but these are nice if you've got like an office area where you've got a data drop and they want really good Wi-Fi in that location. These will wall mount on top of a standard like low voltage ring, right? And it'll take that data jack in on the back side. And then on the bottom side, you'll see on the H350, there's 2 ports on the H350. So you don't have to give up that connectivity. If you want to connect like a printer or a computer or something like that, you still have the physical capability to do that, but also get a Wi-Fi AP. So that's pretty slick. And then if you step up to the H550, you get more ports, and one of them is actually a PoE pass-through, right? So that would be a PoE plus plus on the backside, and that would power up the AP, and then additionally provide one of those ports on the bottom the ability to do a PoE plus. So like if you had to plug in most likely a desktop PoE phone for VoIP, or if you needed to plug in like a security camera or some other type of device that needed PoE, you could do that with the H550s. Again, these are great basic in-room access points. Their antenna patterns are going to be different as a result of them designed to be on the wall versus on the ceiling like the R's. So do keep that in mind, but it's just another tool to have in your belt, so to speak. Taking a look at the outdoor access points and bridges, right? We've got a number of different models here. The entry-level ones are on the right side of this table. The more comprehensive access points, more high-end access points are on the left side. So starting on the right, we've got 3 models of the T350 to look at, right? We've got the T350 SE, which is the directional sector antenna. Its beam pattern is 120 degrees, so a scotch more than a right angle, right? So if you're wanting something that's very focused, if you're trying to shoot it from like the house out to a pool or something like that in that 120 degree beam pattern, this would be an access point that you would use because it's not wasting radio energy trying to talk in a 360 degree area around the access point, right? So as long as you're kind of aiming this into the direction of where you want your clients to be and you're not concerned about connectivity behind the access point, this would be the antenna that you would choose. The T350D, this is an omnidirectional, which means it's going to be the radios in 360 degrees from the access point. So this would be great if you're putting the access point like in the middle of where your clients are on a pole or something like that, because it's got radio coverage in a 360 degree pattern around it. The T350D is the colder temperature rated access point. You'll notice this one goes down to 40 below zero is what it's rated for. So if you guys are up north, or even I guess here in Texas, here in North Texas, we've had some really very chilly single and double digit weather lately. You know, if you want to make sure that you've got your ducts covered, do use, you know, the colder temp rating if you need it. Then we've got the T350C, which is just your standard temperature omni rated antenna access point. So these are all very similar as far as antenna patterns. They're all 64 patterns per band, 512 concurrent users, a 2x2 radio chain on both the 5 gigahertz and the 2.4. Everything is pretty much the same. The main functionality is going to be whether you have Omni or not. and whether you want directional or a cold temperature rating, right? Then moving up to the T750, we've got two SKUs. We've got the T750 standard, which is an Omni, and the T750 SE, which is your directional sector 120-degree antenna. You've got 2400 meg maximum PHY rate on the 5 gigahertz, which goes up from the 1200 on the T350. You've got double the concurrent users at 1024. Your radio chains are both 4x4x4 on these. Your antenna patterns jump up pretty significantly from 64 to 4000. So how I would kind of think about this, and lastly, I do want to point out it does have a multi-gig Ethernet, right? So for standard projects, a lot of people are served well by the T350 series. But if you've got an area where you're trying to do maybe like a outside patio seating area of a sports bar, or like something for concerts, or a commercial area where you're expecting a lot of clients, you may want to take a look at the T750 because of its capabilities, right? So just something to kind of think about whenever you're doing your pre-sales kind of quoting and going through trying to take a look at the SKUs. Here's the product lineup for the Wi-Fi 6 access points kind of compared to each other with pricing. So starting with the R350 on the left, this is a 695 MSRP 2x2 radio chain, all the way up to the R850, which has the 8x8 on the 5 gigahertz. Again, limited lifetime warranty. These are all Wi-Fi 6 certified. The R650, 750, and 850 do have the ability to use a 2.5 gig Ethernet, and the 850 will use a 5 gig if you've got the switching backplane to support it. The R550 will do a honking 4,800 megs on the 5 gigahertz, but it also needs PoE++ 60 watts, right? The R850 is the only SKU, though, that does require PoE++. So if you're doing the 650, 750, that's still PoE plus 30 watts. You don't need anything special for it. On the 850, you would need to use either a PoE++ switch, a PoE++ injector if you don't have a switch that'll do it, or you can power the R850 locally with a power supply and then just use a standard switch. So it just depends on whether or not you've got the ability to get the power plug near it. Then on your outdoors, you've got the T750 and the T350. T350 starts at 1,295 MSRP. The T750 does jump up to 3,775, but again, it's a heck of an outdoor access point. These are very well designed gaskets, plugs, glands, everything like you would expect, grounding straps. So these are definitely designed to be outdoor, but they do have a 1-year warranty on them just because there's a lot of variables whenever you're designing and installing an outdoor AP. So do keep that in mind. On the next slide here, we've got the H series wall mount APs. These are the ones that I was telling you about that have the ability to plug into the back and mount onto a standard data jack location on the wall, and then get the ability to have your 2 ports or like it's a little switch basically, in addition to the AP. So these are very cool, very useful APs. 595 MSRP for the 350, 795 for the H550. It's almost like if you're gonna be putting it in, unless you're very budget sensitive, you might as well go for the 550, right? 60 watts PoE though, because you do have 4-port switch on the bottom, and one of those is a PoE 30 watts PoE plus output on that. So very cool products. Taking a look here at the next slide, some of the common questions that we get, we already kind of touched on this. You can mix and match models. They don't all have to be the same as far as making an unleashed system work. We do get questions from time to time where people are like, hey, do I have to use all R650s? The answer is no. The ability to mix and match makes it so that you can choose the correct access points for the project. If you have above 10 access points in the project, we recommend taking advantage of a function in the Unleashed system that allows you to use a dedicated Unleashed master. Basically, what that means, whenever you enable this functionality, you're going to use either an R750 or an R850 only. Those are the 2 SKUs that you can use. And you're going to basically turn off their Wi-Fi radios, but use their CPU and RAM for running the Unleashed master. So if you're familiar with the old zone director, where it was just a box that ran in the rack that ran all the projects, so to speak. That's basically what you're doing with the R750 or R850. And the Unleashed system as a whole has the ability to support up to 128 access points in a single project and 4,000 clients. So it definitely has the capability to, take care of all the projects that you might run into. If you have something more than this, though, definitely give me a call, because I would be happy to sell you a system that's 150 access points, right? I do have a question here that I want to answer from Andy. He wants to know the warranty for the H series. The H series does have the limited lifetime warranty, same as the rest of the R series access points. Thank you for asking. So click on here. So we touched on this very briefly. We do get questions about Wi-Fi 6E. It's not currently supported in Unleash. Ruckus is going to be skipping right to Wi-Fi 7 this year. And they really only released two 6E models. And I think that was just because there was some people that could take advantage of it during that time. But the benefits of 6E are also in Wi-Fi 7. So they're just going to focus on Wi-Fi 7 for that. 6E just meant that there was additional spectrum for the manufacturers to use. A lot of them decided to use it for backhaul for mesh networking. And if you've paid attention to any of the news coming out of CES, you're seeing everybody announcing Wi-Fi 7 capable routers and access points and stuff like that. So this will be the year when we start thinking about Wi-Fi 7. Now, Wi-Fi 7 on its own, you just can't put a Wi-Fi 7 access point in and call it good, right? You need the rest of the network has to be able to support the speed to see those benefits, right? So we're talking about multi-gigabit switches, we're talking about multi-gigabit routers now, and we're talking about the cabling in place that all needs to be able to support those. We recently started selling Fluke last year for a 10 gig validator. It's not a certifier. Certifiers are significantly more expensive, but this is a validator that you can at least use to verify that you are getting 10 gig on that link from the switch to the access point. So you're going to make sure that you're testing all your cables and pulling at a minimum Cat 6A just to make your job a lot easier. So if you're trying to go the distance, trying to do the multi-gig, anywhere from 2.5, 5, or 10 gig, you'll need a tester and the cabling infrastructure to support that. It will be supported in Unleashed. Right now, the first one that they've announced that will be capable is the R770 access point. So just like the 560, 55, all the 5 series is going to be the Wi-Fi 6 access points. The R770 is going to be the first access point. We're expecting end of Q2, beginning of Q3 as a realistic target date for these access points to become available to us on the Unleashed platform, and that's when we'll start selling them on the site. They do have a $2,595 MSRP though, so unless somebody just really has to have it and they've got the budget for it, this may not be something that we see a lot of early adoption in until the line fully releases, right? So the 770 is going to be kind of one of the higher end access points. I expect that we'll see some other models that'll come in, probably like an R350 did. There might be a 750, right? Something like that, so that we can kind of get a full gamut of the price. And I also expect to see outdoor access points as well at some point in the future. Wi-Fi 6 will stick around. There's no plans to discontinue the 350, 550s, 750s, and things like that, right? So Wi-Fi 6 will still be here. We still need to have a lot of access points capable. We're just now getting the shift of clients that support Wi-Fi 6 as those chips come down and they get starting to put into things. But even with Wi-Fi 7, we're not totally getting away from 2.4 gigahertz. There's still devices out there that need it and will be connecting to those Wi-Fi 7 APs. Still get printers, generators, garage door openers, thermostats, all kinds of stuff will use the 2.4 gigahertz because of the cost. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that goes forward in the future. So let's talk about some of the myths that you may have heard about the Ruckus product line or buying it from Blackwire, right? This is an old myth, and I'm hoping that it dies soon. I haven't, thankfully, had too many conversations about it recently, but one of the old myths was that if you have more than 5 access points, you need a zone director, and that used to be true. Zone director has been discontinued and end of sale for a long time now. If you run into a project that has a zone director, depending on the access points that are with it, a lot of cases you can just simply firmware flash them and use Unleashed, right? And just take advantage of the Unleashed platform without the zone director, without the licensing that was required for it, and things like that. So we've helped a number of dealers convert those. Let's say they had an access point die, they get a new access point from us. We help them kind of walk through the steps of removing the zone director and get everything set up with the one-on-one guide and on Unleash, and it makes a big difference. So the only time that you would need anything is like we say, we recommend if you're doing a project of 10 access points or more, take advantage of the Unleashed dedicated master AP, use a 750 or an 850 for that, and let it ride. One of the others that we hear is Ruckus is too expensive for my installs. And while it may be true if you're looking at it just at a price point comparison, there are a lot of other intangible benefits that you'll save a bunch of money on the back end, right? If you're putting in a cheap switch first, but then you have to keep rolling a truck for it to try and troubleshoot it, to spend time on the phone with tech support, to replace it with something else. Was it a cheaper switch? You know, those are the kind of things that you'll have to take a look at. But let's see, what is the pricing comparison between some of these popular brands, right? We've got the Ruckus 7150 24-port PoE switch, just kind of a very go-to switch that I can see a lot of dealers using in their jobs. This is the $1,920 MSRP switch. It's 24 ports PoE, 370 watt budget. We're not doing anything crazy with that. It has 4 10 gig SFP connections, 132 gig on the backplane, which basically means that's the highway that all the ports use to communicate with each other. And it's got a lifetime warranty, right? If we're looking at the comparable Arachnus, this is a 310 24-port PoE switch. You can see the price on the MSRP is very close. You know, we're within $75, something like that, right? We've got 24 PoEs on the Arachnus and 2 non-PoE ports. The PoE budget is pretty much right on the money between the two of them. You do not get a 10 gig SFP on the Arachnus, and you get a significantly lower backplane throughput on the Arachnus as well. And you only get a 2-year warranty. So is Ruckus more expensive? Technically, yes. If you sell it at MSRP and you're talking about $75, but I think you get a lot of value because you're getting a 10 gig SFP, you're getting a significantly better backplane, which is something that means that all your connected devices are going to be using, and you get a lifetime warranty. For me, that's kind of a no-brainer at 75 bucks. Let's take a look at the package though. So package has an MS24 port PoE switch. This is actually significantly more expensive. We're talking about $700 almost more expensive on the package. Same 24 ports PoE, same PoE budget. You do get 10 gig SFPs on the package, but it's only 2 10 gig SFPs at this price, which is really kind of surprising. And your backplane, while better than the Arachnus, you're coming up to an 88 gig from a 52 gig backplane. You're still not at the 132 gig backplane of the Ruckus switch. And all that more money only bought you an extra year on the warranty, right? So to me, that value is not really very strong. Then we come over to UniFi. UniFi is a very popular brand. There's a reason why they're a lot cheaper though, right? We're looking at, we've got some PoE Plus, PoE Plus Plus. They do have some features there. PoE budget's a little bit better, right? We do have 10 gig SFPs. We've got 2 though at this price. We do have a similar performance on the backplane though between the package and the UniFi, but not as good as the Ruckus, right? And then there's a 2-year warranty depending on where you buy it from, right? The big benefit though, the big reason that their pricing is at this price point is because they don't have any tech support, right? I don't know if you've ever had an issue with UniFi and you need to talk to somebody to figure a feature out. There's no 1-800 number for that. There's no email for that. You got to go to forums. And I hear from a lot of dealers who have problems because they're like, hey, man, I ran into this issue. And then you got some other guy that'll reply and tell you that you're a clown because you obviously don't do networking, and he makes fun of you. And you're like, bro, I'm just trying to resolve the issue, right? Just help me out. But that's how, their business model's different. And they're able to get to these cheaper price points because there is no support in that particular regard. I do like Unify. I think they push the market forward in a lot of cases as far as features for the dollar, and it really kind of it keeps everybody on their toes as far as trying to match that up. But Unify is not for everyone, so just kind of keep that into consideration whenever you're taking a look at your switch lines. Taking a look now, we're going to talk about some of the multi-gig switches. So we took a look at the Ruckus 7150 48ZP on the right, but we've got the 24ZP 8200 on the left, and then the new Arachnus AN620 in the middle, right? So yeah, on the price base, the Ruckus switches are more expensive, but right now the only size that Arachnus had was a 24 port. So you can't really get a big selection in your multi-gig at this point from certain vendors, right? We're looking at the port specs. You've got PoE++ on 16 of the ports on the Ruckus switch for 2.5 gig, which for a lot of guys, that's going to be plenty of PoE++. You may be connecting access points or other switches into this, and that's going to cover a lot of the bases. If you need a full 24 port multi-gig solution, you would want to look at the 8200 series, right? All of your standard options on these are going to have the same PoE budget, around 720, 740 watts on your PoE budget. But the Ruckus 7150 48ZP, as an example, can be configured with 2 power supplies. So that'll take your PoE budget up to 1,480 should you need the ability to do so, right? Let's take a look also on our SFP options. We've got 2 10 gig SFPs on the Ruckus 7150 and the Arachnus 620. But when you jump to the 8200, you get significantly more speed on that because we're going to SFP 28s at that point, right? And here's something else that's interesting too. The backplane, like I said, that's the highway that all the ports use to communicate with each other, right? More capacity on the backplane means more ability to switch that traffic internally, right? So if we're looking at the Arachnus, it's only got 160 gig backplane. The 48 port 7150 has got a 304, nearly twice that, right? And then same thing is twice that on the 24 port ICX 8200, 320 gigs of throughput on the backplane, which is a lot. Then of course, warranty is something that you should be taking into consideration, especially if you're offering service plans and things like that to your customers. The Arachnus offers a 2-year warranty. The Ruckus products have a limited lifetime, and from our experience, you never need to call for a warranty issue on a switch because they just work. Which is kind of funny in a way that you've got the limited lifetime warranty, but you never thankfully have to use it, which is a great thing. And one of the other things that I found was really interesting, digging through some of the product information, these Ruckus 7150 and 8200 switches are full layer 3 managed, which means you can change all the settings and set up VLANs and do everything that you need for a full layer 3 switch if you're into that. If you're using the AN620, this has been described in their paperwork as being a layer 3 light switch, which means specifically that they have no multicast routing and no advanced QoS. So if you're looking for some of those features to help try and take care of an issue of Sonos devices on your network, you're going to want to make sure that you have the capabilities that you're looking for as a switch, because it would be kind of a bummer to think that you're getting a really great switch that's going to address an issue that you're having or set you up for some success in the future. And we just need to make sure that we're dotting all of our I's and crossing our T's, right? And maybe that's a good switch for you, but we're just going to show you other products that are available to you in the marketplace today. Lastly, let's take a look at the Wi-Fi access points, right? This is all very interesting because, again, we get asked about pricing and why does it compare to this and why is it more expensive than that brand? Let's take a true look at it, right? We're looking at the R550 and the Arachnus 820. We're looking at the Access Networks A550, which is the same SKU as the R550. It's just rebranded with an A. And then the Unify U6 Pro, right? So let's look at the Ruckus R550 Unleashed versus the 820 Arachnus. They have an $860 MSRP on the R550, a more expensive $972 MSRP on the 820. The dealer cost in between the two, depending on, what levels you're on with us, what levels you're on with Snap AV. These prices will vary, right? But at the base, we've been told that the 820 is only $45 cheaper than the R550, right? So we're very close on pricing as far as dealer cost goes, and $100 different on MSRP, more expensive on the 820, right? While the R550 only has the 2x2 radio chain, the 820 does have a 4x4, but from everything that dealers have told us with their personal experience on the 820, even though the specs are better on paper, it doesn't translate into real world performance between them. And then as a result, obviously, because it's a 2x2 radio chain, you're only getting 1200 meg versus the 2400 meg on the max PHY rate between the two. And again, even though we're really, really close on pricing, look at this. You've got limited lifetime warranty on the Ruckus R550, and getting it from Blackwire means that you're getting snacks in the box, which is priceless, if you ask me. The Arachnus 820 does have a 2-year limited warranty, but no snacks, which is unfortunate. Now, if you want to do an apples to apples comparison, obviously you can look at the Access Networks A550, which again is the same thing as the R550. There is no firmware difference. There is no, it's literally the same thing. It's just they rebranded it so that you can't shop the model number, right? This is more expensive. This jumps up nearly $100 on MSRP. So the MSRP price is really close between the 550 and the 820 Arachnus, right? But what's interesting is that your dealer cost is about $108 more dealer cost than the R550 is. So you're paying more money for the same access point. Same technical specs. It's a 2x2 radio chain. Same specs on the PHY. It's the same AP. But what's interesting, if you read the fine print for the access, they're only offering a 4-year limited warranty on that and no snacks, right? But it's kind of interesting when you break it down in a table like this, you're paying more money for the same thing and getting less warranty. So make sure that you're looking at all the right key information for making the right decisions for your jobs. And then coming over here to the Unify, I mean, obviously these guys are like ridiculously cheap for their pricing. You've got $159 MSRP, and they don't exactly have the best margins. So dealer cost isn't really a thing. It is a 4x4 radio chain. You are getting a lot faster on the 5 gigahertz. Your 2.4 is pretty much the same across these 573, 574 meg. And again, a 2-year warranty, but no support, right? So there's a reason why they're at these particular price points. There are other things that they're not including at that price, which may or may not be important to you as a company. So some of the other things that you may have heard is that you won't get any support if you buy through Blackwire. That's actually not true. We are a Ruckus authorized partner solution providing company. We've been that for a couple of years. In fact, I think some press just went out talking about celebrating our anniversary as far as being a premier solutions provider for Ruckus, which is great. So if you buy through Blackwire, you don't need to buy the additional Ruckus support contracts if you don't need them, right? You can call us, you can chat us, you can submit a support ticket, you can email support, right? All these options are available to you, and we have Ruckus certified engineers on staff that will help you with your Ruckus problems when you buy from Blackwire, right? That's at no extra charge. You don't have to, dial 1-800-Ruckus support and sit on the line with them and try to explain the problem, and then they're asking you for a license for support and all that stuff. That's how they pay for their team of people to be there. With Blackwire, we're offering that we're doing the first line of support, helping you with the 101, helping you get these things configured if you need it. We're here for you. You get that support from us and from Ruckus certified folks on staff. One of the other things that we offer is a heat map service. So this predictive heat map service is offered to all of our dealers. It's $300 per job site starting. Now, if you've got something that's over 10,000 square feet or a bunch of outbuildings, different things like that, we will, need a little bit more to make sure that we're recouping our time. On big jobs, let's say you've got a big job and you're planning on buying a lot of the Ruckus access points and switches and everything from us anyway, Contact me, sales@blackwiredesigns.com. We'll look at it on a case-by-case basis. If this is your first time using some of this and you want to make sure that you've got that confidence on the job, we'll do a heat map for free for the first one. So definitely talk to us on it. We want our dealers to take advantage of this. We want them to put the Ruckus in their jobs and be super confident about it. When we do these, we're using Ekahau software. We're using exactly what, CommScope Ruckus uses whenever they do their predictive heat map coverage for their customers. We only look at 5 gigahertz at this time. Later, when the software gets updated, we will do this heat map for Wi-Fi 7 products and the 6 gigahertz option. We don't really focus on 2.4 because if you've got good coverage on 5 gigahertz, you don't really need to see the 2.4, right? And we only look at coverage up to a negative 65 dB. We don't show any signal worse than that because if you've got at least 65 dB or better, 65 all the way up to 30, right? That's going to be the minimum signal that you'll need to do the things that people expect, right? You want to be able to roam around the house on that Wi-Fi calling. You want to be able to take a Zoom call and not worry about, your network dropping out. That's the threshold that we show it at. So we design this worst case scenario and we show you where to ideally put the access points. If you've already pre-wired it or you're doing an upgrade, that's okay too, because you can mark on the plans where you have those access points and we'll show you, hey man, if you replace these access points with an R550, here's your coverage. And that way you'll know whether you're getting good coverage or if you need to add some access points because there's just no replacement for radios, right? You can't make up for that in settings. We do recommend kind of as a ballpark rule on indoor APs, we're looking at about one access point for every 1,200 square foot, I believe, for 5 gigahertz coverage. And then on the outdoor APs, that's tricky. Everybody always asks us, hey, can you heat map outdoor? And it's like, not really, because there's no such, there's no model for like an oak tree. There's no model for like, open air, but you're also adjacent to an airport. So there's radar, things like that. Best case scenario, you're going to get 300 feet. Best case scenario, you need to put the access points as close to the client devices as possible, right? Don't try to shoot outdoor AP 300 feet to a pool and expect people to have a good experience sitting at that pool that far away from the access point, because even though maybe your access point can get signal to those client devices, the client devices won't be able to get signal back to the access point. Remember, it's got to go both ways. So the closer you can get the access point outside your clients, the better experience you're going to have. Let's take a look at our remote support options too. So if you're using Domont, Domont has deep integration into the Ruckus access points. You can get that set up and take a look at all kinds of things like what the current channel is, what your average RSSI is, what your floor noise and how many bytes you've sent and received and things like that. It's really great. So nothing really crazy that needs to be done for Domont. Oversee, we get this question a lot. Like, how do I get into my access points? How do I make sure that they show up in Oversee? And it's actually very simple. When you follow our Ruckus 101 guide, you're going to be setting up a management IP address. And then we've created a knowledge base article on our website under support.blackwiredesigns.com. Under the networking category, it'll show you with screenshots how to get connected to the management IP address. And then so once you log into Oversee, you click on that management IP address, it'll take you right to the web interfaces if you're local, and you can see all your access points, you can see your SSIDs, you can see your clients and make the changes, everything that you need to do from there. So great integration into Oversee. There's nothing special that has to be done for that. If we don't have any questions about the sales side, I'll go ahead and kick it over to Josh Blodgett, and we'll get started with the deep dive on the 101.
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. How do I configure this equipment? So with our Ruckus 101 guide, we lay it out all for you on our website. I'm sure you guys have seen it, or if you haven't, we have the link there. But essentially, we go step by step on how to configure it from beginning to end, even if, let's say, you don't have the right firmware for the AP that you have. And so we have those instructions step by step with images. That way you can just follow along, and they're the best recommended settings. that we've tested with the equipment to show, okay, this is going to be your best optimal setup. Is it like the definitive end all be all? No, sometimes you'll need to make a few adjustments here and there, but it's the best place to start to have a really stable network. So it gives you that basic configurations, it gives you the firmware that we're recommending, and we have the firmware available on our website, so you don't have to go to Ruckus and try to find it. It's a little difficult. Sorry, Ryan. But other than that, we have the optimal settings for you already set to go, so that you can just install it and get it ready and just move on with the next step that you guys have for your installation. So for the initial setup and configuration, when you're first setting up the Ruckus APs, you don't need to have them all connected to the network. You can, but generally what we recommend is just having one initial AP connected, programming it from beginning to end. And then once you've done that, you just plug in the rest and they'll all join up and grab that configuration. You don't have to do anything else with the rest of the APs, which makes it for a really quick install. You do have a couple of hiccups sometimes when you're trying to initially go to the AP and you can't seem to get to the web page. That might be because you need to enter HTTPS, not HTTP. If you're just typing in the IP address, it doesn't always auto redirect. So you need to make sure to use that HTTPS in the beginning so that you can actually log in. That's more of a common issue that you'll see. The starting IP address is 192.168.0.1. So if you're not using DHCP and you're just trying to browse to the AP, then that's going to be printed on the bottom of the AP. Actually, you'll see that there with the default login for the access point. But you'll also see during the quick install that you can actually do an update initially before you even get started. I don't suggest doing that just because if you bought, let's say, the APs together and they're on a specific firmware that maybe not be, if it's not the same as whatever you updated to, then you're going to have a firmware mismatch. And we'll get into that later, but that causes the APs not to auto join up and grab the configuration. So it's just best to do the quick install, set your SSID, password, username, and just hit finish. It'll build the Unleashed profile, and then you just go in and follow our steps according to our guide. Next, you're going to see during that setup that there's a section under the general settings where it's preferred master. This is a little bit different from the dedicated master that was mentioned earlier. The preferred master is you can set a primary, and if you want a secondary access point to be the one that takes on the UI that manages all the configuration and everything, is what you log into when you're trying to make any changes. So usually that's set to be the least used access point, something maybe in a basement or in a closet or in a part of the home or property that's just not being utilized very often. That way that can handle that load, and the other APs can just concentrate on connecting the clients and managing that data. So you can set the primary and then the secondary. In case the primary goes down, the secondary takes over. And so you don't necessarily need to set a preference. The Unleashed controller will automatically just choose the first AP that you've plugged in as the master, and then it will then take over. However, if you do want to set the primary and secondary, it's going to be there. And I just wanted to specify that that is different from the dedicated master, where it does not broadcast any SSID. It's solely just the controller. But you don't need to use that unless you have like 10 APs or more.
What's nice about this too is that that's a distributed model for the configuration. So even though you're setting up the configuration and Unleashed primary preferred master is going to be on that first AP, in the event that that AP goes offline, the Unleashed system will automatically just detect that, and then all of the other APs in the same Unleashed ecosystem on that project have a copy of the backup of the configuration. Every time you make a change, that's automatically distributed to the other APs. That way, if that AP that's currently running the primary master, if it goes offline for whatever reason, let's say the access point dies, let's say somebody accidentally unplugs it or whatever, another AP is going to go, okay, I'm the new preferred master I'm the one that has the records of the configuration and everything that's going on. So it'll automatically take over, which is really nice. We've got a question here I'll answer real quick.
Yep.
Craig says, does it matter if you're using a higher end model versus a lower end model as the primary? For example, a 750 versus a 350. So obviously the 750 is going to have more horsepower. So if you're talking about if you're using a mixed system, right, you can set the primary preferred master here to be the 750. And as long as that's on, it'll use the 750 for being the primary master. If it goes offline, obviously it's going to go to an R350. You will see a little bit better performance using a higher end 750 as the preferred master. And that's why it's also one of the only two models that are available to be dedicated and dedicated master mode whenever you get above 10 APs, and it shuts off that radio to use that role.
Exactly. And so moving on to the next part of that configuration. In the past, we were using optimize for performance. That's not the case anymore. We are using the standard optimize for compatibility. That's usually the default. So you don't need to necessarily make any changes with the newer firmware unless you've manually specified the performance. And the reason why is because of DFS channels. When you use the performance, it opens up new channels on the 5 gigahertz range. Sometimes it's necessary, most of the time it's not. Some devices have issues using the DFS channels, so that basically you're trying to use the DFS channels and it's just not compatible with whatever the device's radio is using. On other cases, it's affected by radar, such as like from planes, weather, things like that. And because those other radars are using the same channel space, they get priority. And so if you're on the same channel space as them, it's going to automatically drop your signal. There's no like handoff to other channels or anything like that. It's just an automatic drop. So you lose connectivity.
This actually happened to me. Yeah, when we were first setting up the 101 guide, we would recommend optimize for performance, and I live near DFW Airport, and that would happen to me. Everything would be working fine, and then all of a sudden, everything on the network would drop, and I was super confused as to what was going on. Sure enough, the recommendation, once we found out switching to optimize for compatibility, it doesn't use those extra DFS channels that are subject to that. So we've had a couple of guys who are like, oh, heck yeah, I'm going to optimize for performance. And then they call us and they're like, man, it seems like every so often, everything on the network just completely drops off. What's going on? So we take a look and, come to find out it's because of the DFS channels are being utilized by something else that gets priority.
Yep. And the way you're going to know that is because of logs. So if you're using performance mode out of necessity, and I'll explain that in a minute, and you're trying to see is my signal dropping because of that, it'll be in the log stating that there was a drop because of the DFS being overtaken. So there's at least a log for it in case you need to troubleshoot that issue. Where it might be necessary is if you have a lot of APs, 5 gigahertz that are close together. So let's say you've got 10 that are 10 or plus that are close by in a really dense area just because of how the layout of the property is and like the wall materials, which does happen on occasion. You might need more channels than are available because now you have a lot of co-channel interference and there's not enough channel space. So then you can increase that range by using optimize for performance. And so it opens up that range so that you can have more channel space and not be fighting the airspace, depending on like, let's say you're not the only one using 5 gigahertz around you, and there are a bunch of others. And so that might be the case. So while it's not what we start with, it's definitely there if you need it. And if you do have issues, there's logs for it to determine if that is indeed the issue for network drops in that kind of situation. Okay, and here's the bread and butter to make Wi-Fi calling and just Wi-Fi connectivity work really well. In the new firmware for, well, not as new, but the 200.14 firmware that we're recommending, we're not recommending 200.15, by the way, because 15 is still new. We haven't fully tested it ourselves with the settings that we use. So we're not currently recommending it. It is available, but we're not going to support it just yet until we've verified that all our settings and anything new that is in place, we know how it works and any issues that might arise from it. But going back to 200.14, this is now available under the radio control. When we're setting up the SSIDs, some people like to use the blended model where you're using 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. We're not recommending that because we want the 2.4 and 5 separated. The reason why is with Wi-Fi calling, some phones get to, well, not some phones, all phones get to decide what they want to connect to. So while 2.4 and 5 gigahertz may be available, it may just go to 2.4, which has a greater range, which causes issues with overlap. And because of overlap, it's going to connect to the AP that's, down the hall, upstairs, all the way on the other side, because the signal range is good enough. And because of that, it's going to cause problems with Wi-Fi calling, bad quality, call drops, things like that. So we try to limit that with 5 gigahertz. It doesn't go as far, has better bandwidth, and you're going to have a better experience overall. So we recommend separating that 5 gigahertz for that reason. You're going to connect to it. And then you're also going to set the BSS min rate and OFDM only settings. The OFDM only basically removes the legacy type of connections, like the B radio, for instance, 802.11b. And that's going to force newer type of connections like the AX and all that, so that you have a better connectivity experience. And on top of that, with the BSS min rate, you're setting a threshold for the APs to tell the devices, hey, if you don't connect at 12 megabits or better, I'm going to have you go to a different AP because you're not fitting that setting that I have. And this helps with roaming so that you're not connected to the AP down the hall, even if there's sufficient overlap with the 5 gigahertz, because you want a little bit, just not too much. And sometimes you might get too much. And so there is another option of 24, and in some cases you may need to increase that to 24, but it's not necessary. You can start with 12, see how it goes. And if you have Wi-Fi calling issues, this is going to resolve 90% of them. Anything past that, feel free to call us and we can kind of figure out what's going on. But most of the time, it's these settings are not implemented. So that's really going to help with that Wi-Fi calling. And so the SSIDC you want to set up as 2.4 for IoT devices and 5 gigahertz for like everything else that you're streaming, like your tablets, laptops, phones, things like that. In addition, with the option of the OFDM only, you never want to implement that setting on 2.4 because a lot of IoT devices use that legacy connection. Like there are brand new, what was it, a sprinkler system that was still using 802.11b, even though it's older technology, it still uses it. And so if you were to turn on OFDM only, that would cause connectivity problems. So that's why we never apply those kind of settings on the 2.4 and only on 5 gigahertz, which is why you separate it. Okay, and then Wi-Fi calling. Wi-Fi calling with Ruckus, they added a new, not a new feature, but an additional feature where you can actually put the domain names of the different services for Wi-Fi calling because it improves the experience in the way that if you're entering the Wi-Fi coverage and you're on a call, it has an easy transition of going from cellular over to Wi-Fi calling. And it uses the same carrier domain that you're currently using with your phone. And so if you're coming into the property or leaving the property, it really does well with that handoff of giving you a better call experience so that you're not dropping calls or having spotty calls or like having to switch over, like end your call and start it again once you're on Wi-Fi calling, things like that. So they have that added feature to help with that transition of going in and out, so that you're not having that terrible experience where you need to reconnect your Wi-Fi and restart the call or anything like that if you're having issues. So that mixed with the previous settings is what's going to give you that best Wi-Fi experience. Best practices for AP firmware updates. Okay, so AP firmware updates, I mentioned this earlier. We don't recommend just the latest AP firmware that comes out right when it does, because we like to do our own tests to make sure that the settings that we're letting you guys know to use are going to work optimally with everything else, such as like we moved away from performance and went to compatibility mode, things like that. Or if there's new features that are available that used to be in command line versus now they're on the UI, which was the OFDM only and BSS min rate. We like to have the instructions available to you. We want to make sure that everything works properly, that there are no bugs or anything that we've discovered that might cause an issue with, like maybe conflicting with some other settings that you might have. And so we don't recommend just the latest firmware, because you'll see the 200.15 out right now, and we're still in the process of reviewing that. The 200.14 is going to be available. And with that, there are a few firmware update options that you have if you need to update from an older firmware. And there's the online options and then the local updates. We don't recommend doing the online options because usually it doesn't give you the full list of firmwares that you may need or want. And so we typically recommend the local upgrade. The local upgrade is where you're going to go to our website, you're going to see the Unleashed firmware version that you need, download it, and when you go down to the firmware updates in the settings, you'll just hit that local update, select the firmware version from your downloads, and then you're going to update all your APs. This is what you're going to do if you have an mismatched firmware, where you might need to go to a specific AP that's not showing up. So you'll find its IP address, log into it, and update its firmware locally. And you'll do that. If there's too much of a gap, the AP updates may fail. So sometimes you need to do them in series, but you can call us for assistance on that. And then another issue is sometimes updates won't go through. And that's usually due to a weird issue with Chrome. We're not sure why, but Chrome has an issue with updates with Ruckus. All the other browsers work fine, but you can use incognito mode with Google Chrome, or you can just use a different browser to update the firmware. And I've sometimes had to do that in order to get the firmware to go, but it doesn't always occur, which is odd. And so that's sort of the reasons what I was mentioning. The AP won't update. You want to use a different browser or use incognito mode. If the AP doesn't show up to be updated, that means it needs a firmware update most of the time. And so you'll go to the local AP, go to its IP address, update it, and then it will automatically join and grab the configuration. So you should be good to go as long as it's all on the same AP firmware match. If you have like a ZoneFlex AP, meaning the firmware that's either the standalone or what was used with the old controller, you're just going to do the same method of removing the controller, going to the AP itself, and updating the firmware. You may have to default it on occasion, but either way, you're going to be uploading the firmware, so it will have a clean slate anyways. But you can't carry over like configurations from ZoneFlex if you're just flashing the APs with Unleashed. What are the best practices for AP placement? We kind of, or Cody went over this, but I really want to emphasize that we have the same software that Ruckus has, Ekahau. Ekahau is the heat mapping service that we're going to be utilizing. We use the same standards that Ruckus does. It has all the AP radios, the radio antenna patterns that Ruckus uses in the profiles that we can select from. The thing is that when we have Wi-Fi calling issues, we have coverage issues or things like that, it starts from the very beginning. This is going to save you a lot of time and money if you're trying to troubleshoot, like, hey, I need to tell the customer I need to buy another AP, or I need to move the AP from where it was and I'm not quite sure where to put it, things like that. Oh, it's always the after that you need to go back and troubleshoot why this person's having issues. The other day I had a customer call in and they were having Wi-Fi calling issues. They had all the settings already, everything looked fine, but when we started looking at the signal details of what the devices were getting, they were outside of that -30 to -65 range. And so because they're outside that range, they were having Wi-Fi calling issues. The call was stuttering or dropping. And because of that, they need to either move APs or add a new one. But then if, let's say, you added the new AP, you might be also causing a new issue where now there's too much overlap from one side or the other. And so you want to make sure that you really get the AP placement down so that you have proper coverage. You're not oversaturating the network with too much Wi-Fi, and you're just not spending more time and money that you don't need to. So I would highly suggest using the service before you do any type of install, or especially if you're taking over an area and or a project, and once you take over, you're like, there's a lot of Wi-Fi issues. You might want to do a heat map just to make sure that the APs are in the right place. What speeds are being produced by my device? So with speed testing, this is one of my favorite topics because it's not so cut and dry a lot of the time. Sometimes customers will do a speed test and be like, hey, my phone's getting only 100 megs, my computer's getting 300, and my tablet's getting 200. What's going on? A lot of things are going on. So one is when you're doing a speed test, if you're going to speedtest.net, fast.com, things like that, you're testing your connection not only from you to the Wi-Fi and to your router, but out to the internet and back. There's a lot of places where that internet speed can drop. Internet speed is only as slow as its, or only as fast as its slowest part. So in that case, what is the true Wi-Fi speed? That's going to vary on a couple of things. My phone, for instance, can have a 3x3 radio, or I can have a 4x4 radio, or I can have a 2x2. If I have a Ruckus AP that has a 4x4 radio, I can only use 2 radios if my phone only has 2x2. So my speed is going to be limited. If my phone had 3, then it limited by 3 radios. And so it also going to change if this is an 802.11n, AC, AX. All those are taking into consideration of what's happening for your Wi-Fi speed, including your environment, blah, blah, blah. But the easy way to tell what your true Wi-Fi speed is simply by going into the settings. So I don't have an image of it here, but under the client list, you're going to find your phone or device or whatever it is. You're going to select show details, and you're going to get this list of stats. One of them is going to tell you your channel. It's going to tell you your speed, like this right here. And it's also going to tell you your signal strength. And so because it's going to give you all that information, you can now tell the customer, okay, this is what's happening. So for instance, here's an example. This right here is my laptop. My laptop was getting 960 megs to the access point. So, and I'm using Ruckus access points. I'm using our settings. I'm on 5 gigahertz because I know what channel I'm on. And I know what AP I'm connected to. So everything checked out as me getting almost a gig's worth of speed. And the amount of internet that I'm paying for is 1 gig. But I'm only getting 300 megs when I did a speed test. Why is that? Something to do with my ISP. It wasn't my router after I checked it. It wasn't the AP. I already know what speed I'm getting, 960 megs. So that means that it must have been with the ISP. Figured out it was. So you can have speed tests done, but they're not going to give you the true values. The true values is going to be under that show details. And that's going to give you, one, the channel you're on, the AP you're on, the signal strength you're on, and the speed that you have. That last one is important to show them, like, hey, your speed test's not exactly right. This is what you're getting at home. Anything outside of that is something else. And so that's a good way to show your customers, like, hey, this system is rock solid. Let's figure out what the actual issue is. And you're not spending a bunch of time trying to figure out what the problem is with the Wi-Fi. So it's a really good way to see that and understand how speed works and inform the customer, because depending on their devices, the environment, and the APs you're using, your speeds will vary. Even if you ran the show details again, you're going to see that speed fluctuate actively. So you'll see it at 960 megs. Next, it'll be 800. Next, it will be 500. Then jump back to 960. Because Wi-Fi is like a wave. It's going to fluctuate. And depending on your environment and what's going on, will determine your speed. But it's a good way to indicate where you need to go for troubleshooting. If you need to see, like, oh, maybe it is the access point. And on occasion, it might be. But often it's not. it's something else, usually on the network, if not the ISP. Do you have information on switches? Yes, we have plenty of information on our switches. We have, again, a guide on how to configure the switches, but also how to update them, and the recommended firmware that we're providing, again, just like our Ruckus access points. Updating them is a little bit more tedious in the sense that you have to use command line. There are GUI available options. However, we found the best method to do that is through the command line. We have a step-by-step guide on how to do that, and as well as the firmware itself. However, you can also call us and we can assist with any firmware updates. Generally, firmware updates are not necessarily needed unless there's some kind of issue that we're trying to resolve. And so that would be one of the first steps to make sure that there isn't some kind of firmware bug or anything like that, or something that's like messing up with the system. So updating the firmware would be one of the steps that we do when troubleshooting any switch issues, which are pretty minimal in general. Usually it's like a physical problem or something like that. But we have the full guide on how to do this if you want to do the firmware updates on the 7150s or the 8200s as well. And as well as the configuration guide on what settings that we recommend when setting up the switch initially, if you ever needed to reference that or check to make sure that you have all the essential settings in place. And again, if you still need assistance with that, we'll be more than happy to help. Some common questions. Should I use the AP as a router? While the feature exists, we do not recommend that. It's basically just a straight router in that case, where the AP will hand out a DHCP and just send the traffic out to the internet. It's not a firewall. It's not anything else other than just providing a connection to the internet when you do use the router feature. So it's not something we recommend unless you're just need like very, very temporary internet connection. But it's not like a permanent solution. You should always use a proper router or firewall to do that kind of traffic handling and for your network. Because the AP, while has the feature, it's more that it just has the feature rather than it's built for it. Can I use the app for remote management? Yes, you can use the app. However, we don't recommend it because there are a couple of issues with the app. Sometimes the AP won't show up. Sometimes it won't join. Sometimes when you're configuring the AP on, let's say, the browser, and then you switch over to your phone and make some changes that can conflict with each other. And then it's going to cause problems where something really weird is going on, like the SSID is not working or broadcasting right. And so you have to default and start over again. So we don't generally recommend the app. You can, quote unquote, manage them from there up to like, I think 10 APs. But again, not recommended in general until they've made some improvements. Excuse me. Can I flash other Ruckus APs with unleashed firmware? Yes, you can, but it depends on the model. Some models support the newer firmware, some models don't. So the older models generally stop at 200.7 for the unleashed firmware, and the newer there are some newer-ish models that still support up to the newest firmware that's been released. It just depends on the hardware that it has and whether it can support those new features. So if you ever have any questions on that, you can check with us. Eventually, we'll have like a list on our website as far as what APs will be supported. We're working on that, but if you just had a question, feel free to call us. And then same thing, can I add an older AP? You can, but it just depends on the firmware version since they all have to match and what the AP can support. But generally you can put like an R320, let's say, with an R650. That's no problem. Where you kind of get issues is like the older version, like an R310 or like an R300, 500, things like that. Does Ruckus have a wireless bridge? They don't have a specific wireless bridge. They used to, but they do not anymore. There is an option where you can use meshing between two access points that are pointed to each other. but it just depends on what the network speed you want to be at. And it's not a dedicated wireless bridge. You're just using the meshing function. You want to make sure that there's nothing in the way from line of sight, and that if you're using, like, say, outdoor rated if it's outside, you're using outdoor rated APs to do that. But it's not like a dedicated wireless bridge. If you need something for that, then you might want to look at a different brand, but it is available. But again, not specified specifically for it. And as far as meshing, do you need it? No, you don't actually need to use meshing. However, it is available as like we recommend it as a last resort, because if you're using meshing, you have your root AP that's connected to an Ethernet, and then you have your meshed AP. The meshed AP is connected wirelessly to your root AP. And this is just an example. It's not real numbers, but let's say you're going to lose half your signal strength. And so if you connect another meshed AP to a meshed AP to your root AP, that's another half that's being lost. So if you're doing Wi-Fi calling, it's not really the best environment for that. But it can help in a pinch if you can't run any cable for whatever reason, or if it's just for a short distance and you need something there. Then using meshing would be acceptable in that sense, but you don't want to just dedicate to using only meshing for that kind of setup, because you're not going to get the best performance out of your access points in that sense, because the more hops you have to take, the less traffic you're going to get, or less maximum potential throughput for your traffic you're going to get, I should say. And we've come to the end. Do you have anything to add, Cody?
No, I think that pretty much covers everything. I do want to point out, obviously, that if you need assistance with sales stuff, always reach out to us, sales@blackwiredesigns.com. Be sure to give us a call, 623-455-6455. Numbers and everything's on the website. Again, for all your pre-sales questions, happy to answer any of the questions and chat with you about your project. If you're in the field and you need help, definitely hit us up on the chat, on the phone, or email support@blackwiredesigns.com. We're also making sure to point out our new training hub for more of these sessions going forward, based on different topics, whether that's continuing Ruckus 101s that we'll do, DMX LED lighting and our blacklight tool that we have, Multiview 101 if you want to learn about how to do multiview processors, UniView for the UniView cameras. And as always, previous recordings and our schedule for upcoming classes are going to be available on our training hub, which is easily accessible from the website. Last question I did have here from Craig. I'm going to answer this live. He says, do you recommend for remote management of APs and switches OvrC? Like I said, OvrC is fine. There's an easy way to get into it. We cover that on our support site. So if you're on blackwiredesigns.com, we'll go there now, and I'll just tell you it's under dealer resources. There's a support portal there. When you go to the support portal, you're going to look for tech articles. And then under tech articles, there's a category for networking. And it says how to connect to Wi-Fi access points using OvrC. And as long as you follow the 101 and set up your management IP address, and you've got an OvrC Pro device, whether that's the router, that's the control port controllers, or the standalone OvrC hub, that's the Pro, you've got something like that in the network, you're already all set to go. So you don't have to switch management platforms if you're already deeply involved in the OvrC platform. Go ahead and use it. No problem. I don't think we have any other questions, and that pretty much brings us to the end. I want to thank everybody for their time today. Again, this has been our Ruckus 101, and we look forward to having you here in the future, and thank you for your business with us. Y'all have a good one.
Thank you.